In late 2023, an anime named Frieren Beyond Journey's End released to universal fanfare and left a massive impact on the anime industry. It incorporated a rustic and quaint art style with fluid and dynamic animation, as well as a melancholic and relatable story themed around cherishing the short time we have in this world. While it did have philosophical themes such as the impermanence of human life and the lasting impact of minor acts of kindness, the anime was not too heady or deep, making it easily digestible for viewers of any background, even if some viewers critiqued that the slower and more meandering pacing of the show makes it unexciting and boring. Regardless, the show is now the #1 highest rated show on my anime list. Not that my anime list is the bastion of critical objectivity or anything. Still, it is noteworthy that such a staggering amount of people rated this show so highly. However, we are not discussing the quality of the show today, but rather the online cultural discourse it left behind, such as Frieren becoming a symbol of racism in some fringe internet communities due to her rhetoric and attitude towards demons. Despite the show being universally beloved, there is a point of contention in the assumed underlying politics behind the storytelling of Frieren, revolving around the depiction and treatment of demons. In conjunction with discussion and discourse regarding Frieren's demons, there's also the constant reemergence of discourse about the morality behind genociding enemy factions in fiction in general, such as the Bugs and Helldivers in Starship Troopers or Orcs in Lord of the Rings. While these pieces of media all do a great job at being provocative and prompting discussion regarding the nuances of what it means to be evil and the morality between rehabilitation versus obliteration of said evil races, I can't help but feel like people are injecting way too much of their personal politics into these stories and inhibiting their ability to interpret media objectively, whether you are for or against killing all demons and bugs. By unnecessarily injecting one's personal politics into these pieces of media, you are preventing yourself from digesting the media in an objective and informative way, and instead are using the piece of media as a platform to reinforce your own beliefs to fight a pointless online battle. I don't like dunking or call-out culture, especially not content based around roasting specific people for having specific opinions, because people should be entitled to their opinions. But it's important to give context to why this discourse came to be to begin with. So this guy made a tweet and a subsequent video essay discussing why he believed that narratively, Frieren's demons are mishandled and thematically contradictory to the overall theme of the story. And as far as I can tell, his opinion is the one that has garnered the most engagement online on the side of quote-unquote demon sympathizers, which painted a huge target on his back, leading to many cool tweets and video responses attacking him that gained more views than his original argument. Like many others, I disagree with him, but if I were to play devil's advocate, I think the guy had a rather well put together argument, and despite me not agreeing with him, I respect where he came from, even though I do believe he approached the show from the wrong perspective. The crux of the video boils down to the fact that by Tolkien's definition of pure evil, a living being with sentience cannot be pure evil by design, because sentience and decision making allow that being to follow moral codes, and that all creatures, whether they are evil or not, can be made to follow a more humane and good moral code, thus rendering them no longer evil. Using the Tolkien definition of pure evil, the demons in Frieren are, in his opinion, not pure evil and are capable of redemption because there's evidence that their likeness to humans and the moral code they uphold within their community of demons give them enough sentience to repent and be redeemed. He concludes his argument by stating that it is narratively more fitting for Frieren to not genocide demons because the show's main theme is valuing and understanding living things from all walks of life, and that despite an elf's obvious physiological superiority in their slow aging and near eternal youth, they can still see the value in the brief existence of other inferior living things, and that genocide with prejudice isn't thematically cohesive because it implies there's simply no goodness in demons despite their sentience. Whether you agree with him or not, he makes a sound argument and cites an interesting comparison to one of the most classic depictions of an evil race, which are the Tolkien orcs. And please, hold your fucking horses. I don't need to see another fucking screenshot of Frieren saying demons are animalistic beasts that exist to kill humans and behave the same as mimics and only engage in human-like behaviors to trick humans. I've watched the fucking show, I know what she says. You aren't dunking on anyone by reposting the same quote over and over without intellectually engaging in the argument. This is where a lot of bad faith arguments lie, because this man is entitled to his opinion and analysis, and has reasonable evidence to support it and articulate it well enough. Yet people refuse to even entertain that Frieren can be consumed in a way where viewers question the morality behind genocide with prejudice. And no, I'm not a demon sympathizer. I don't give a shit about the lives of demons in Frieren. They are innately a threat to humans and deserve to die, especially with their sole goal in life being the eradication of all other life forms. However, it was important for me to ask the question of whether or not they do deserve to die first. And with the context of the story and with the judgment of my own moral code, it is only logical to say yes. I do not have sympathy for demons that kill humans with no remorse. And they deserve complete eradication, given that there's no real evidence that they can assimilate with civilization. I did not take Frieren at her word because she is coming from a biased perspective, and is clearly extremely prejudiced against demons, considering her first instinct when met with a demon is to pick out her blicky and start emptying the clip. Was she also the creator's vehicle for stating that demons are a force of irredeemable destruction and that he wasn't going to explore their morality narratively? Likely, yet demons were given quite a bit of nuance that muddles up that fact to a small extent, even if ultimately the overall narrative paints demons as mostly evil. The episode with the child demon that was adopted by humans especially gave demons far too much moral nuance for them to be called irredeemable evil. There was a short period where the child was able to coexist with humans, and ultimately it had some sort of misguided and confused display of repentance, where it tried to replace the child she ate with the child of the family that took her in as a twisted form of apology. I don't know about you, but if I was a tricky as fuck demon that only imitates human behavior to survive, why the fuck would I blow my cover and burn a house down to apologize by replacing a child I ate with another one? I would have just eaten everyone at night and fucked off back to Demonsville. I'm not saying the demon child deserved mercy, because it's definitely the smart and logical choice to just kill this creature that kills at a whim, but it certainly isn't as maliciously evil compared to, say, Lugner, who straight up just said, okay guys, let's pretend to be humane, then fucking eat and kill everyone when they trust us, or Aura, who intentionally kills every human she sees and turns their mangled corpses into an undead army. It is okay to read between the lines in a piece of media, even if the narrative seems straightforward. Media is inherently interpretive, and a good piece of media provokes thought and analysis from the viewers, and some of the most engaging pieces of work have nuance that facilitates years of discussion and interpretation. For example, if we were to delve into semantics, it's even logical to make the argument that demons in Frieren aren't fitting for the traditional definition of evil. We do not label animalistic beings that instinctively kill to survive as evil the same way we don't look at a bear in the wilderness as being evil. You stand in front of a hungry bear and it's going to bite your fucking head off, and yet it is only rational for us to look at the bear as being part of the cruel and unforgiving dangers of Mother Nature instead of having contempt or prejudice towards it. Are demons the same thing as the bear, both beings existing outside of morality and simply a force of nature as Frieren described them? Or are they explicitly evil because despite their sentience, they choose to kill humans as proven by Luckner and Aura? And if they choose to kill humans since they don't kill from raw instinct and can mimic sentience to a point of involuntarily displaying signs of humanity, can they choose to be humane much like the confused demon child that attempted to apologize despite failing? Can demons be conquered and enslaved or trained to be subservient much like how humans have tamed the wilderness? It is not pseudo-intellectualism to ask these questions because that's just what critical thinking is when analyzing a piece of media. Now, of course, if you arrive at a horrendously wrong conclusion due to misinterpreting the piece of media, then you might be a bit of an idiot, especially if you can't support your position. However, when all said and done, Frieren as a piece of media generally does not engage in that nuance because, as I've stated before, it's not particularly heady and it was never meant to be an exploration of morality and redemption of evil. It was always meant to be an introspective and emotional spin on the classic Japanese take on medieval fantasy, about a party of heroes that goes on an epic trek to rescue townfolk and slay the Demon King. And in the context of Frieren, the story is about an elf that has outlasted her party's legendary victory over the Demon King, and she seeks to reminisce the beautiful journey she had while making connections with the next generation of adventurers, looking to create their own legends. So no, it is not a flaw that Frieren blasts demons to hell with prejudice because demons are the typical villains in a traditional Western-inspired adventure story due to various innate evil qualities associated with their mythos and lore. But it is also not inherently wrong to question whether or not demons could have been given a layer of depth that could potentially improve the storytelling, even if the answer is no, Frieren would not be improved with more sympathetic demons, because part of the appeal of her character is her aloof and nonchalant demeanor when interacting with friendly characters, but absolutely murderous and cold when met with demons. The story sacrifices potential depth in its exploration of morality, and instead hones in on depicting an incredibly unique and captivating main hero, who has an unwavering conviction for eradicating evil that contributes to a fresh and exciting take on a familiar and beloved genre of storytelling. I mean, I guess I kinda get it. Frieren's racism towards demons narrative can be interpreted as a critique of Western society's eagerness to forgive criminals, citing their cultural upbringing and unfavorable extraneous circumstances as a reason for breaking the law and harming their community, believing that their humanity and innate goodness will prevail someday. It's cathartic to hear Frieren say, no, fuck that, you are born evil as fuck with no potential to rehabilitate, and I'm gonna put you in the dirt, and be completely justified in her urge to kill with prejudice. Some viewers see themselves as Frieren, able to see the true evils in others and advocating for their eradication, whereas all the normies and wokes are fatally empathetic like the clueless lord of the town, sabotaging their society's structure and safety because they were tricked into believing that demons and criminals can rehabilitate and assimilate into society, when in reality they exist purely in squalor, violence, and deception. Honestly, I think you've gotta be pretty terminally online to believe this shit reflects real life. All said and done, the demons in Frieren have no IRL analog, and the story isn't meant to be politicized. No one is being tricked into having empathy by a deceptive and evil race because, for better or for worse, humanity can only progress through rehabilitation and acceptance, not genocide. It is literally not an option to condemn or kill groups of people that we view as a detriment to our society. And you have to be a pretty antisocial freak that hasn't actually spoken to anybody if you believe that a suggestion like that is even remotely feasible. While I think it's only natural for people to have race-based prejudices due to the evolutionary pattern recognition ingrained in our brains, to justify said prejudice and to make it your entire personality just because a cartoon elf indiscriminately kills a group of fantasy monsters is bordering on mental illness. The same mental illness as people that justify their entire political stance based off of fictional events, like people that cite Man in the High Castle or Handmaid's Tale as if it's real. I suppose it is kind of concerning that so many people are going out of their way to try to redeem antagonists in media, especially if the antagonists consist of an entire group or race that can be interpreted as misunderstood victims. Modern media has been flooded with a great deal of gray morality and we're all the bad guys style narratives ever since Western pop culture, especially Hollywood, became increasingly apologetic and shameful of America's history and constantly tries to tell stories that critique imperialism, colonialism, fascism, bigotry, and etc. If a story needs irredeemably evil antagonists, they need to have Nazi symbolism, such as large organized armies saluting their leader and chanting, large banners with a distinct symbol of their faction flying front and center, and various costume designs that references historic Nazi uniforms such as the rounded SS helmets or Hugo Boss style officer uniforms. Traditionally evil races such as demons and vampires are now nuanced, complex, and represent marginalized minorities that are misunderstood, who only commit immoral deeds out of desperation in a hostile regime that stripped away their ability to function without breaking draconian and inhumane laws. I don't think these types of narratives are inherently bad, but the overabundance of them in recent memory has definitely affected people's perception of certain tropes, especially when it comes to themes that explore morality and ethics. The way people consume and interpret media has shifted dramatically throughout the years, and something like Starship Troopers is an interesting case study on how an era's politics can affect a piece of media's interpretation, despite that piece of media remaining unchanged throughout the years. In the director's own words, Starship Troopers, the movie, is by design a critique of fascism, as he explicitly stated in various interviews.
The voice you're hearing here now is Paul Verhoeven, the director of Starship Troopers.
And this is Ed Neumeyer, the writer of Starship Troopers.
But I can tell you that the movie is, in fact, in our opinion, stating that war makes fascists of us all.
That's true. That was the theme. And this opening was modeled on the Why We Fight films of World War II. In fact, this whole movie is modeled on propaganda films made during the World War II.
When the movie first came out, it was heavily critiqued as being too explicit of fascist propaganda, and that the satirical elements are too sparing and ineffectual, such as stated in the review written by Roger Ebert, one of the most acclaimed film reviewers of his time. After a decade or so, it was praised as being thoughtful satire that critiqued fascism, and the common consensus is that critics at the time failed to acknowledge its clever, subtle, satirical elements, such as stated in Red Letter Media's retro review and also this popular PewDiePie review. Now in the 2020s, it is being celebrated and praised for its unabashed embrace of genocide, much like Frieren, and how awesome it is to unite together and fight bugs because it's funny to dunk on people that oppose bug genocide since they are glass-hearted sissies that don't want to hurt nobody. As if anyone actually wants to be like Rico, watching his girlfriend get stabbed to death by a bug, seeing his entire platoon being ripped to literal shreds, and spending the rest of his life fighting bugs until he loses all his arms and legs, and eventually his life like his homeroom teacher or the recruitment officer. Although, I think one of the biggest issue with Starship Trooper is that maybe Paul Verhoeven's style of satire is much more style over substance, and his political stance is flimsy and surface level. RoboCop, for example, is a critique of how a capitalist society can go as far as to grant corporations ownership of the soul and body of a man, and allow them the freedom to reprogram him into being a corporate product to sell stocks and push profit margins. Though at the same time, RoboCop as a character is a hero to the people of Detroit and a bastion of justice who hunts down murderers and rapists. By making RoboCop such a righteous hero, it's almost as if the narrative is praising corporations for doing something good, that by saving Murphy's life and stripping away his humanity, they have created an immutable mechanical protector of the city. Obviously, a lot of RoboCop's narrative also hinges on the fact that remnants of his humanity and soul allows him to break corporate protocol and programming and pursue real justice despite being a literal corporate drone, and that the decrepit state of Detroit is largely the fault of OCP. But still, much of the film paints the corporate execs as sleazy bastards at worst compared to the real villains of the movie, which were your standard crime lords that murder and steal with no remorse, who turned Murphy into a splattered mess of gore while laughing hysterically. Starship Starship Troopers suffers from the same issue where it clearly attempts to parody fascist societies and the inhumane lust for war and violence of such cultures, but it gives enough narrative justification for war that the theme becomes muddled. And paradoxically, the film is adapting a setting that is written to be largely democratic, albeit an idealistic and right-leaning brand of democracy with a strong emphasis on militaristic virtues, which I guess Verhoeven and his writers interpreted as being fascist. To sum up one of the biggest points of discourse in regards to Starship Troopers, there are basically two camps. One camp believes that all-out genocide of bugs is justified because not only did bugs murder the human Mormon colonists, they also launched massive asteroid attacks that destroyed Buenos Aires, the city in which our main character Rico's family resides. Thus, all subsequent military retaliation is justified as an act of self-defense against a hostile invading race of arachnids. The other camp believes that the Mormons were justifiably killed by invading explicitly marked bug territory outside of Earth Federation protection, and that the concept of an intergalactic bug asteroid is a farce, suggesting that the attack on Buenos Aires was an inside job due to the sheer impossibility of bugs from across the galaxy being able to snipe the Earth with a meteor when their technology in the movie is largely primitive outside of supposed bug plasma being able to launch meteors into orbit, thus rendering the war on bugs a complete and utter waste of human lives and resources, since it is an entirely manufactured conflict created to uphold a warmongering society that is comparable to fascist governments. This discourse has basically lasted for nearly 30 years and has only gotten more contentious and politicized with the advent of the internet as newer generations of viewers experience this movie. With the release and success of Helldivers, a PvE horde shooter video game heavily inspired by the film, a large demographic of fans became emboldened and spent a few weeks of their lives LARPing as faceless Earth Federation soldiers, spending hours and hours killing bugs and shouting generic meaningless slogans like "for democracy" or "the only good bug is a dead bug." Ah yes, I love it. Being a hive mind of disposable goons and giving all my time to a Sony Games as Service video game where all your efforts can be nullified by a dev pushing a button that guarantees either a victory or defeat. Such an act of independence and a display of masculine prowess. I mean, I get it. It's funny to dunk on people for being a bug poster. In your mind, why the fuck would anyone have sympathy for mindless killer bugs that exist purely to shred humans to pieces? Unfortunately, that is largely a strawman argument because while, yes, a lot of people believe that bugs are innocent, no one is truly on the side of bugs. Disavowing the genocide of bugs isn't supporting the preservation of a hostile race and negligence of your own race. It is to seize the needless waste of human lives and resources for a pointless never-ending conflict that accomplishes nothing outside of perpetuating a cycle of needless death and destruction that ultimately harms humanity as a whole. However, there may be too much evidence that bugs are an active aggressor due to the film's writing being kind of muddled and shitty in its adaptation of the book and explaining its sci-fi technology. The crux of this argument basically rests entirely on whether or not you believe that the Buenos Aires bug meteor was an actual bug orchestrated attack or a false flag staged by the United Citizen Federation. If it was genuinely launched by bug plasma through a fucking wormhole and traveled through space at light speed to perfectly nail Earth, then sure, you gotta kill the bugs before they pull more Deus Ex Machina meteors out their ass to intergalactically attack Earth. However, that would completely obliterate the entire premise of the movie. Fascist critique doesn't work if the military actions are justified. If the Buenos Aires attack was genuine, then it warrants an immediate mobilization of the military for self-defense, and with the obvious lack of communication and negotiation with bugs, the only real solution would be to neutralize them. You can't critique fascism when you've created a premise in the story where the only solution is to eradicate an enemy that cannot be reasoned with. I'm not going to go into extreme depth with the theory crafting as to whether or not the bug meteor was genuine or not, since there's reasonable arguments on either side and there's likely hundreds of hours of that content existing already. Logically, scientifically, and thematically, it makes sense for it to be a false flag. However, there is evidence that Paul Verhoeven didn't plan it that way, since he never explicitly confirmed it to be a false flag. And also based on the books, the bugs straight up nuked Buenos Aires, so I'm more inclined to believe that Verhoeven clumsily adapted the destruction of Buenos Aires without understanding the ramifications of his creative decision. Personally, I don't have a strong stance on this, but I do think that the movie is far more interesting if you buy into the satire. The movie is a fun sci-fi military romp that is elevated beyond being just a bug-killing movie due to the satirical undertones and its propagandistic style. It's engaging to connect the dots and see how these characters are manipulated by their government to go from young students full of life to being broken and shattered drones of a pointless war effort, who all either die horrendously or live with so little life in them that their only existence is to spend the rest of their lives fighting or training the next generation to repeat this doomed cycle of death and violence, despite the cheerful and energetic presentation. The cyclical nature of death and replacement in Starship Troopers is also reminiscent of the horrific deaths of World War I, where the war machine at the time required a constant recycling of lives. Fresh new troops are brought in as the previous waves die off, they get younger, more inexperienced, and more expendable. Rico goes from a naive young man joining to pursue his high school love to a grizzled war veteran who is a splitting image of his homeroom teacher, adopting his moniker that ironically mocks his own inevitable demise, and training the next generation to eventually take his place when he does kick the bucket. I suppose by adapting the book, there is a glimpse of the book's theme being left in the movie, which is this idea that to become a citizen is to take control of your life, and that you should be willing to fight and risk your life to uphold your freedoms and ideals, instead of sitting idle and letting others lead the world astray. That is a meaningful theme and all, but outside of the teacher's homeroom lesson in the first scene, plainly stating these things as a surface level backdrop, the rest of the movie had little to nothing to do with that theme. If you love those themes, then you can be a fan of the book because I'm sure it's far better executed in its original medium. Why are you pretending like Paul Verhoeven accidentally made a jingoistic masterpiece when so much of what's in the movie is spitting in your face? Why are you citing Paul Verhoeven's interview to support your stance that Buck started the war, then ignore the part of the interview where he calls every character a Nazi? I think it's perfectly okay to completely disavow the movie as an unfaithful adaptation with a forced and unfitting agenda if you dislike its fascist satire, because I do legitimately find the movie to be a jumbled mess of conflicting themes despite being entertaining. But it's absurd to make bad faith arguments about viewers that engage with the movie in its intended context because they potentially do not align with your real life political leanings. It's not being a traitor to mankind to question whether or not the government has your best interests at heart. History has shown time and time again that political agendas have caused endless pointless armed conflicts that resulted in the deaths of millions for no gain. Like that one time a Chinese guy pretended to be the brother of Jesus Christ and led an armed conflict that killed up to 70 million Chinese. People as critical thinkers should consider whether it is worth it to take up arms for one's country and analyze the goals of their supposed leaders instead of joining because it's a fun way to bond with the bros and you feel like a badass who's fighting for a greater cause, even though the cause is just some sociopathic old guy's delusion of grandeur. I suppose another angle to viewers embracing the surface level aesthetics of the movie and not reading too deep into the sinister underlying politics is due to the fact that many of them are young men who are attracted to the surface level virtues of being a group of selfless protectors who put their lives on the line to eradicate terrors that threaten humanity's existence. I mean, I think that's fine. I don't know why you have to fixate so much on Starship Trooper, though, for those elements. Every single Call of Duty game is about killing foreigners with your boys and going hoorah! And obviously those sell like hotcakes. There's plenty of movies about eradicating evil invading monsters and aliens like Edge of Tomorrow, Avengers, Independence Day, Transformers, etc. You have all these options that embrace American military superiority that all have zero moral gray area due to the enemies being evil as fuck. Yet you fixate over the one fucking movie where the director's explicit objective was to satirize hyper-militant societies. Maybe we should take a step back and realize that it's actually really fucking silly to be so radically political about a cartoon with an elf girl or a movie about killing giant CG bugs. Then again, I suppose much like the attractive design topic I discussed before, this is ultimately a conflict that is the byproduct of the online culture war. There is a belief that we must preserve and promote media that share our political leanings, or else we will be oppressed and made irrelevant, and the other side would have won. To me, that's really silly because when I consume a piece of media, especially media that is relatively accessible and made for teens and young adults like anime or sci-fi movies or most video games, I don't go into these pieces of media expecting extremely insightful or poignant politics. Even if you think Metal Gear has deep commentary on the ethics of warfare or manipulation of technology and information, ultimately the problem is solved by shooting rockets at a giant mech or naked wrestling with your clone. These pieces of media are great at using politics as set dressing and adding dimensionality to the world building, but they do little to affect people's political leanings, and don't aim to anyways, even if they may present interesting political concepts. Even something like Disco Elysium, a game that is falsely labeled as commie propaganda and written by self-proclaimed neo-commies, is primarily about personal trauma and rebuilding oneself from zero when we are crushed by the weight of the world and lose our identity and ego. Oh, what's that? Most media exists as entertainment to help us relax from the horrific and depressing realities of everyday life? Why are we so eager to politicize the entertainment we consume and turn it into a vitriolic tribalist conflict? Isn't real-life politics frustrating and depressing enough already? Why are you so ready to put on a Frieren or K-On profile pic and post American crime statistics based on race on Twitter when you are South American, likely from Mexico or Brazil? If you like an elf girl cartoon, then just enjoy it, bro. Why are you arguing with teenagers with underdeveloped frontal lobes on Twitter who has 30 different color flags in their bio? Just hit the block and mute button, little bro. Better yet, fuck off Twitter. Please don't let the entertainment you enjoy become another source of misery and conflict. It's no way to live.